Hey everybody, in this video I'll be taking a look at the Illusionist Spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition and comparing them to their versions from the 1st edition. Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, the channel that plays tabletop games with toy bricks and blocks and discusses the rules and strategies that build the foundation for those games. Be sure to check the description box below for timestamps, some of our other Frostgrave content, and for the official PDF from Osprey Games, which lays out all the rules for all of the spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition. This video does assume that the viewer has at least some familiarity with either the 1st or the 2nd edition of Frostgrave, and it's also part of a 10 video series where I will be looking at each school of wizardry from Frostgrave 2nd edition and discussing the removed spells, the slightly changed or completely overhauled spells, new spells for the school, and my personal opinions about those changes. In the 1st edition, the Illusionist school seemed to be considered one of the weaker options available. And although Teleport is possibly the best movement spell in the game, and I personally enjoyed transposing my Warhounds with my Knights or my Marksmen, it seemed like the school didn't quite meet their goal of battlefield manipulation and deception. So now let's take a look at the bricks and blocks of the 2nd edition spells for the Illusionist school. You may notice when you first glance over the Illusionist spells that the spell Monstrous Form has been removed. And if you're like me, I always got that spell and Beauty confused as far as which one did what, because the abilities were similar and having them in the same school actually felt a little bit redundant. So I think getting rid of one of them was a good choice. The other 7 spells are still in the game, and while some of them have been reworked significantly, most of them are pretty similar or the same. The spell Teleport allows the spellcaster to warp anywhere within line of sight. A minor spoiler from the 2nd edition book is that line of sight can now never extend past 24 inches. So this spell has been limited a bit because now you can no longer travel from one corner clear to the other corner of the battlefield. The spell also now clarifies that you cannot remove your figure from the board. Glow works exactly the same as before, causing the figure to glow brightly and become easier to spot in the midst of the snow and ruins, giving all shooting attacks against the target +3 to their rolls. This spell still does not allow a will roll to resist it, and keep in mind that it is affected by the reduced overall line of sight to 24 inches. Invisibility makes a member of the warband invisible and thus untargetable. The only change to this spell is it adds the action of dropping a treasure as one of the actions that will cancel the spell. Transpose magically swaps the locations of 2 figures that the spellcaster can see. The only change to this spell is that figures can now be up to 12 inches apart as opposed to 10 inches from the 1st edition. This is the only spell in the game that allows you to move 2 figures at once, so having that flexibility of an additional 2 inches of space between the soldiers is significant. Illusionary Soldier creates kind of a spectral image of a soldier that can attack but not deal damage, but can still support the rest of your team in melee. This spell is now signified as a before game spell by the B in parentheses in its description. However, the spell can now also be cast during the battle. I assume the figure would arrive in base-to-base contact with the spellcaster, similar to the spell Raise Zombie, but it's not actually specified here. It does say that the Illusionary Soldier cannot be an apothecary, probably to avoid the issue of an apothecary usually carrying a healing potion. It is clarified that if you cast this spell before the game, you must tell your opponent which one of your soldiers is the Illusionary Soldier. Beauty makes your opponent see a beautiful figure, which affects how they respond to the spellcaster. In 1st edition, this spell only stopped soldiers from attacking the caster, but now the caster can't be the target of spells either. Also, figures aren't able to move into combat with the caster, which was part of the function of the now removed Monstrous Form spell. And it clarifies that opposing spellcasters can empower their will rolls to resist the effects of the spell. This spell still doesn't have any effect on any of the creatures that are found in the bestiary or on warhounds. Fool's Gold is essentially a brand new spell that just takes the name of a first edition spell, as this spell has been completely reworked. Previously, this was an out-of-game spell that created a fake treasure that you could place on the table to attract and throw off your opponents from the real treasures. Now, the spell has a casting number of 10 instead of 8 and is a line-of-sight spell that targets a figure that's carrying a treasure. If the figure fails a will roll, the treasure token is taken from the figure and the spellcaster may move it up to 4 inches away from the figure, as long as it is still within the spellcaster's line of sight. The mechanics for this spell originally implied that you cast an illusion on the battlefield and it's not realized to be fake until a soldier gets right up to it. Now it implies that the soldier has picked it up and they've already been lugging it around before they realize it's fake and then they discard it. But what I think fits the mechanics a little better, especially since the spell is cast during the game, is that you cast an illusion either on the treasure itself, or so you've somehow clouded the mind of the character carrying the treasure so that they think the treasure is on fire, it's disgusting or hideous or something that makes them just want to discard it, and then they immediately realize it actually is real. One thing to keep in mind is the spell doesn't specify it has to be an opposing figure. So if your treasure-carrying thief just got tangled up in melee with a knight or a barbarian, you can essentially make them fumble or toss the treasure closer to a friendly unit that can then pick it up and run for the edge. Keep in mind that it does say the figure must make a will roll, not may, which is kind of thematic because your thief in this scenario probably realizes your plan is to sacrifice them while the rest of the team runs off to count treasure. I'm really excited to try out this spell, as I think it could be very useful for both battlefield manipulation and for annoying your opponent. The only completely new spell for the Illusionist school is Blink. This spell makes a figure disappear and then reappear nearby on the battlefield. It has a casting number of 12 and targets any figure within 12 inches and line of sight. The figure is moved 4 inches in a random direction. However, a figure wishing to resist the effects is allowed a will roll. And it's specified that uncontrolled creatures will always attempt to resist the spell. I asked some questions about the spell on the Frostgrave Facebook page and got some clarification from Joseph McCullough, the author, that the spell only moves the target horizontally, so not into the air or down into the ground. Though if they're moved off of an elevated terrain, they would then fall, taking damage as normal. Also, a figure next to an obstruction can end up on the other side of it, so they could get teleported through a wall. However, the movement cannot leave the target embedded into a terrain piece, so it can't insta-kill a figure. In those cases where the random direction would leave them stuck inside a wall, just simply re-roll or re-randomize the direction. This spell is similar to the Transpose spell, but it only affects one target, which could be beneficial when there's not 2 characters you want to move around. I think the main use for this will be to pull a soldier that's in melee out of the combat, or to affect a ranged soldier up on a high point to hopefully knock them off of a tower or something. Also, it can be used as kind of a gamble if you've got a soldier that's removing a treasure from the board. If they're close to the edge, maybe you can move them closer. Or if an enemy figure is close to getting off the board, maybe you can move them away from the edge of the board. But it is a random direction, and keep in mind that it is limited to 12 inches. Most of the spells in this school saw some minor changes. Teleport lost some of its range, while Transpose gained some. Combining Beauty and Monstrous Form into one spell, I think, was a great idea, and it makes the new Beauty spell a more viable option. With Fool's Gold, I found that the previous version was really kind of hit and miss, and I'm really excited about its new form. There's not a lot of options in the game to manipulate treasure tokens, and this will definitely give the Illusionist some more choices for how they can interact and manipulate the battlefield. With the new Blink spell, I'm not quite sure what I think about it. I already like to use Transpose to move figures in and out of combat, but I'm sure that players will find some good uses for it. And those are the 2nd edition Illusionist spells. If I missed something or got something wrong, let me and the community know in the comments below, as my goal with these videos is to create an accurate resource for Frostgrave players. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, add a comment, or subscribe so that you can keep up with all the content that I'm releasing. And with that, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and I'll see you in the next video.